So I went to a startup instead, called Every. And that's the start of my startup journey, actually. Startups, once I go into that first startup, I totally fell in love with that idea that I was able to really do a lot. I like my I like to have challenges. I like to learn a whole lot about how to build something brand new, get challenged every day. Just want to get myself really hands and feet dirty into just learning things, hacking things, and startup have a lot more opportunities for me to do that. There's a lot more things to do than people. So that's the kind of the culture that I like, and I don't have to spend all my time, learning red tapes of politics and stuff like that. So I just fell in love with startups. And that opened up my journey of just going to different startups. I worked on a search engine at Every. I went to a company called Z2 that works on mobile games. And then I worked on Halo, the game, at the game studio. I always worked on the back end. And from that point, after those experiences, I went to a big corporate called VMware to work on an open source project called Cloud Foundry. And so fast tracking all of that, so I was in Seattle for about 8-9 years. And I had a big itch in my heart, because I got into open source. If you know software engineering, right? Open source is actually quite a bit, a big trend of software these days. A lot of software is open source based. And back in 2013 or 14, it was definitely booming. And there wasn't a lot of opportunities for open source based software engineer roles in Seattle. So I convinced I forced my wife and my dogs to all move down to California, back in I think 14. So we moved to California. I was actually applying to join LinkedIn. I got an offer from LinkedIn to work on a project called Kafka. Kafka is a very famous open source project. But I was only there for like a month and a half before I got poached by a company called Mesosphere. And this company, it was a big struggle for me because it was a lot of risk. It was already a lot of risk, I feel like, to come to California because my salary didn't get bumped that much. There's extra taxes and all that stuff. But Mesosphere, this startup is started by two people I never heard of, very tiny, only 6 people back then, wanted me to give me a 30% pay cut, right? Because at an earliest stage startup. But what's very interesting, after interview, I told the CEO that I'm not sure I want to join the startup. I'm still gonna think about it. So he pulled in a bunch of VCs to chat with me. One of the VCs called Mark Andreessen. I'm not sure I heard that person's name. He's the founder of a very famous VC firm called Andreessen Horowitz, right? That's Mark Andreessen. So he actually is part of my interview loop. He told me that, hey, Tim, you should really consider joining Mesosphere. He was actually convincing me to join the startup. And that opened my eyes quite a bit, like, oh, wow. Like I heard of his name, when I searched his name on Google, the first page was Wikipedia. So I know he's definitely a big name, a big shot name. And I was like, wow, I always had this thought in my mind that, hey, one day I'd love to start my own company. But I don't know how, I don't know when, and I don't even know what. But I feel like it's a big step forward. Part of it, it's not super clear, but it feels like, hey, there might be a really big upside if I join Mesosphere this early. Like I can talk to Mark, I can get to know a lot of these VCs and stuff like that. So yeah, I end up leaving LinkedIn, returning back my sign-on bonus, whatever, and just went to Mark and Mesosphere, and that really opened up a lot of my career because that Mesosphere became a unicorn. I was leading engineering teams there, and from that experience, I got to know a whole lot more VCs. I got to know a whole lot more people. So from that, I started my own company called Hyperpilot. So Hyperpilot, I started it with my coworker at Mesosphere, and he's actually a Stanford professor. And long story short, we're building a software to sell to medium to large enterprises, help them save their costs. If you're running a lot of computers in the cloud, we can able to save you up to 70 to 80% of that cost using machine learning and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, well, I started in 2016, raised seed funding from NEA and Bessemer, two pretty large VC firms. And quick story, 2018, I sold a company to Cloudera. And it's not a retirement money kind of outcome. For me, it was a small outcome. But to me, I feel like it's a huge lesson for me to learn how the startup work, right? Because I was a CEO founder. I had to learn everything from scratch. And through that journey, that really feels like I've learned 10 years of experience in two. Anyway, after that, I stayed at Cloudera for a year, moved back to Seattle. And, during that time, so I guess two tracks happened. I became an SVP engineering of a startup called Cosmos. It's in the blockchain space. And I started to do angel investing. A lot of friends started to really reach out to me to ask me, hey, Tim, you had an exit, really help us out, be part of our rounds. And so I angel invested maybe about 15 companies. And, this startup actually didn't work out on its own. And I was soul searching quite a bit. I really love this part of the story. I was believing. I love working with startups. I love working with founders. So I ended up raising my first VC fund called Essence. Anyway, that's quick life story. I've realized I've spent a lot more time than I wanted to. But I've invested in, like I said, probably more than 40 companies so far. About 18 to 19 angel-wise, 20 plus companies for the fund, enterprise focus and stuff. And yeah, having a blast. It's a really anyway. I want to stop here because I know there's a bunch of questions that people